Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that 109 terrorists have been killed in the operation in northeastern Syria. He was speaking in Ankara and said the operation is not against the Kurds, but terrorist groups. More in this report. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the military incursion aims to restore the region's demographic structure. Erdogan rejected international criticism of Turkey's attack on a Kurdish militia inside Syria. He says Ankara intends to create a safe zone to help refugees return to Syria. He threatened to give Syrian refugees in Turkey free passage to Europe if EU countries describe Turkey's move as an occupation.
Hey European Union, pull yourself together. I say it again. If you try to label this operation as an invasion, it's very simple. We will open the gates and send 3.6 million refugees your way.
Meanwhile, a Kurdish official has warned ISIS militants could break out of Syrian prisons as fighting intensifies. Ilham Ahmed says Turkish planes bombed a prison housing ISIS members.
One of the prisons in which the ISIS prisoners are kept under the control of SDF forces was bombed by Turkish warplanes yesterday, and probably some of the ISIS members have escaped from this prison.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the US did not encourage Turkey to launch the attack.
Yeah, well, that's just false. The United States didn't give Turkey a green light. We'll continue to be in a position to do what we need to do to keep the American people as safe as we possibly can.
Washington has proposed sanctions against Turkey for its military action, but it's not clear if the proposed sanctions will have enough support to be passed by both Congress and the US Senate. Well, staying with the Turkish operation, and an urgent closed-door meeting of the United Nations Security Council has been called today over Turkey's military offensive in Syria. The UK, France and Germany have requested the meeting after Turkey launched its operation. The international community has expressed concern over Ankara's actions. European capitals have criticised Turkey's actions, warning it could lead to an ISIS resurgence. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says the operation risks destabilising the region and harming civilians. The Arab League have also called on an emergency meeting over the development on Saturday. In a statement, Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry said the operation is a threat to regional security. The UAE has called the offensive unacceptable aggression against the sovereignty of an Arab state. Well, for more on this story, we're joined by Yusuf Arum, who's an Istanbul-based analyst. Yusuf, thank you for joining me now on Indus News. So tell me, European heads earlier said they're afraid of an ISIS resurgence because of this operation. How real is this threat?
I think that's absurd as well, because there's no reason for an ISIS resurgence. Now, Turkey's willing to take the responsibility. President Erdogan has given President Trump assurances that Turkey will take over the duty of defeating ISIS and take over the duty of repressing any type of ISIS revival. The Operation Euphrates Shield in 2016 and the governance behind that area, including Al-Bab, Jarablus, and Azaz, the way Turkey has governed these former ISIS strongholds, we've never seen any type of ISIS revival in that area, is a strong testament to the way Turkey can help govern, train local Syrian forces for police, or whether it be for as FSA members to serve militarily, allow local councils to rule, provide education and health services. This is all, these past actions show what Turkey could do in the future for northeast Syria as well.
Yusuf, the US are also opposed to the operation and said they may impose sanctions and visa restrictions if any unlawful activity may take place. They've done this before to Turkey. What are the chances of that happening again?
Frankly, these proposed U.S. sanctions are absolutely absurd, and the reactions coming out of the European Union and various countries who remained relatively silent in Syria, who have been very inactive in Syria, all of a sudden becoming very vocal when Turkey wants to undertake a counterterrorism operation to shore up its own national security, is a very counterproductive and very hypocritical. These countries should have been more active in Syria over the last decade, but we're seeing countries like Italy, we're seeing countries like France, Germany, all of a sudden choosing to become very, very vocal when Turkey wants to proactively secure an area on its border, cleanse it from terror, a terror organization that emanates a threat directly inside of Turkey's borders, and also rebuild this region to repatriate 1 million Syrian refugees, which is an important part of normalization supporting a political solution process. Now, when we're looking at the latest what's going on in Syria, we're seeing Turkish forces shelling across the border, especially in the Tal Abyad, Rasul Ain area. These are important areas where there's YPG fortifications. We're seeing the Air Force going 30 kilometers deep, dropping their payload and precision strikes, predetermined with reconnaissance during the joint patrol period with the United States. We're also seeing Turkish howitzers softening up the area. We can probably expect a much bigger infantry incursion in the upcoming days once these fortifications and YPG terrorists have been softened and properly shaped for a ground operation.
Thank you, Yusuf. That was Yusuf Arum, based in Istanbul, there, who's a Turkey analyst. Now, 14 aid agencies warn that civilians in northeast Syria are at risk as humanitarian aid may be cut off because of Turkey's new military operation in the area. The aid agencies say some of their staff have fled with their families while others are on lockdown. They say the flow of vital services, including medical facilities and water supplies, have been interrupted. According to the UN, 1.6 million people need humanitarian assistance in northeast Syria. The aid agencies urge the parties to conflict respect international law. They said the warring sides should refrain from using explosive weapons in populated areas. Now, in our other headline, we have London police that's charged self-exiled Pakistani politician Altaf Hussain with a terrorism offence over hate speech he delivered in August 2016. He's the founder of a political party called the Muttahida Qawmi Movement. Hussain was presented before the Westminster Magistrates Court today, where his lawyers pleaded for bail. But the court imposed strict conditions for his bail. It barred Hussain from travelling without the court's permission and banned him from appearing on social media and the television. Hussain was arrested 4 months ago as part of an investigation into alleged instances of hate speech. He's facing several criminal cases in his home country of Pakistan, and the politician has been declared an absconder by Pakistani courts. Well, staying with Pakistan, and the Prime Minister Imran Khan will visit Saudi Arabia and Iran to defuse tensions in the Middle East. Foreign Office spokesman Mohammed Faisal says the Prime Minister may undertake the visit later this month. Last month, US President Donald Trump asked Prime Minister Imran Khan to mediate between the two countries. Now, as the crisis in occupied Kashmir continues, over 100 Indian students and teachers wrote to Prime Minister Narendra Modi to condemn New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir. They said the curfew and communications blackout in Kashmir is unacceptable and called for the release of thousands of Kashmiri politicians detained without any charge whatsoever. They said the Indian Army has locked up 8 million people since the 5th of August, and they went on to say that the lockdown has created a shortage of food and water and medicine in the valley. Now, Pakistan's army says unprovoked Indian firing from across the line of control killed a soldier, and it said 2 women were wounded in the firing. Pakistan's military says it retaliated to the Indian firing. Tensions between Pakistan and India increased after New Delhi annexed occupied Kashmir on 5th of August. Now in Bangladesh, hundreds of students protested against the killing of a student after he criticised a water deal between Dhaka and New Delhi. Abrar Fahad was allegedly killed by members of the student wing of the ruling party on Monday. He was beaten for 6 hours after posting a comment on Facebook. He criticised the deal allowing India to take water from a river in Bangladesh. US President Donald Trump says he'll cooperate with the impeachment inquiry if it's authorized with a full vote. Trump showed signs of cooperating a day after the White House called the inquiry unconstitutional. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said President Trump did not seek to blackmail him. More in this report.
US President Donald Trump is facing a congressional inquiry for asking Ukraine's help to probe former Vice President Joe Biden. The White House has criticized Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for not calling a vote of the full chamber to authorize the investigation.
Then it turns out that the whistleblower is a Democrat, strong Democrat, and is working with one of my opponents as a Democrat that I might end up running against. The whole thing is a scam. It's a fix.
Trump said the case could be heard in the Supreme Court and go on for years. He added the Republican Party is being treated unfairly by the Democrats. However, the Democrats maintained their position.
In full view of the world and the American people, Donald Trump has violated his oath of office, betrayed this nation, and committed impeachable acts. You know, to preserve our Constitution, our democracy, our basic integrity, he should be impeached.
President Trump now awaits a full vote so the impeachment probe can be debated in court. Ukrainian President Zelensky says Kiev is unlikely to publish its version of a transcript of a July 25th phone call between him and Trump.
Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, Britain's opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has accused Prime Minister Boris Johnson of dragging Queen Elizabeth into the world of politics. He spoke during a speech in Northampton and Corbyn promised Britain a new political agenda. Britain's trapped in a political crisis over the voters' decision to leave the European Union in 2016, otherwise known as Brexit. Both the ruling Conservatives and opposition Labour Party want an early election. But Mr Corbyn says he will not agree to elections until Prime Minister Johnson rules out the possibility that Britain will leave the EU without a deal.
Holding a Queen's speech before he's trying to call an election is a cynical stunt. He's using the Queen to deliver a pre-election party political broadcast for the Conservative Party.
European MPs rejected France's candidate to lead the EU's industrial policy. During a second hearing, President Emmanuel Macron's candidate, Sylvie Goulard, failed to defend her role in a job scandal. President Macron had proposed Goulard for the post of EU's Internal Market Commissioner, responsible for defence integration. But Goulard was rejected by 82 EU lawmakers in 2 committees. Goulard was questioned about a fictional job scandal at the European Parliament. She was also asked about her high-paid work as an advisor for a US think tank. North Korea has threatened to resume nuclear and long-range missile tests. The Foreign Ministry has issued a warning following the breakdown of US-North Korea nuclear talks in Sweden last weekend. The ministry says the talks collapsed because the United States had no new proposals. It said the recent US missile test is a serious provocation, and it was referring to a UN Security Council meeting that's responsible to the North's submarine ballistic missile tests. It said the UNSC unfairly puts North Korea's self-defense in the wrong hands. The Foreign Ministry says this prompts Pyongyang to reconsider preemptive steps to build trust with the US. Now in North Africa, Tunisia's Ennahda party has won the country's parliamentary elections. The Election Commission says the party took the lead with 52 deputies. The 217-seat chamber is now likely to have a fractured coalition government. Ennahda will be the largest party in Tunisia's new parliament, but it may struggle to build a governing coalition with just 52 seats. The heart of the Tunisia party came second with 38 members, followed by the Democratic Current Party with 22. This is the second parliamentary election since the Tunis revolution of 2011. Now from Tunisia to Libya, and the Libyan army says it shot down a warplane over southern Tripoli. The aircraft was from the eastern forces of Commander Khalifa Haftar. The army's media department says the fighter jet tried to land at Al-Watia airbase but crashed. The jet, identified as a Russian Sukhoi, had been targeting the Libyan army in Al-Azizia. Heavy clashes erupted with the Libyan army attacked Haftar's forces in the Al-Sabia and Al-Dawaisha areas of the country. Now in Australia, 2 people have died in a bushfire in New South Wales and 70 homes have been destroyed. The fire comes at a time when communities are already suffering from a drought in the region. Officials say the fires destroyed over 198,000 acres of land just this week alone. And there are currently 40 bushfires burning across New South Wales and Queensland. Well, from Australia to Asia now, and the dengue outbreak in South Asia has alarmed the United Nations. The World Health Organization estimates there are close to 390 million infections every year. Over the last year in Bangladesh, 160 people have died, and the total number of infected patients stands at 14,000. In Pakistan, 40 people have died, and over 10,000 dengue cases have been registered this year. And in India, over 1,100 reported cases, with the death toll standing at 56. Countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines and with Malaysia have also been hit by dengue outbreaks in recent months. Well, Polish author Olga Tokarczuk and Austria's Peter Handke have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Tokarczuk was named for the prize last year, but the Swedish Academy suspended it after allegations of sexual assault against one of its members. They'll both each receive an award and share a nearly $1 million together, with the ceremony being in December. Both are expected to attend. Tokarczuk is a writer, activist and public intellectual, and she's been described as one of the most acclaimed and successful authors of her generation, while Handke is one of the most influential writers of contemporary fiction. Now, today is being marked around the globe as World Mental Health Day, with a special focus on suicide prevention. The World Health Organization says mental health disorders account for 90% of all suicides. More in this report.
Anxiety and depression lead to a suicide every 40 seconds. The rate is projected to double by next year. Psychiatrist Dr. Shehryar Jovenda says mental illness is now the leading issue affecting daily life.
Among children, teenagers and adults, depression and anxiety is increasing. A lot of people think that among children, depression doesn't take place. Long ago, this was a concept, but now that's not true.
While most see suicide as a violent behavior, Dr. Aisha disagrees.
Suicide is not a choice, it's a disease. Let's stop the stigma of mental illness and being progressive in uplifting the well-being and self-esteem of not only of others, but ourselves as well.
Societal taboos attached to treating the problem continues to be the biggest roadblock in healing psychological disorders.
There's a lot of stigma attached to mental health problems and psychological problems, and people think that if someone is going through anxiety, tension, depression, they must be mad. Actually, that's not true.
In developing countries, even the acceptance of mental health issues as an ailment is rare. Support from family and friends is crucial to help the patient.
We must recognize and accept our responsibility to help ourselves, help our dear ones, and people at community level by giving unconditional positive regard, acceptance.
Traditionally, elderly males have been the most vulnerable to such disorders. However, recently, anxiety, stress, and depression has been climbing amongst young people.
Now, in other news, vampires have been haunting moviegoers for decades, and now a French cinema has decided to show classic vampire horror movies on the big screen and take you on a journey through the history of vampires. If you get scared easily in horror movies, you may want to look away.
Bats flying through the night, Draculas lurching in churchyards, or a clown waiting for you in a street corner. Some scenes from movies still give us chills and thrills regardless of our age. Of all fantasy films, the horror movie is said to be one of the most watched. The Cinémathèque Française is putting on a show covering over 100 years of horror movie history. The exhibition displays the costumes, jewels, masks and other accessories of the spooky characters.
We tried to create an immersive, spectacular exhibition in which we show all of the cult objects surrounding the myth. Objects used to make the second Nosferatu, the costumes from Dracula.
The organizers aim to display the beautiful evolution of the vampire industry from early 19th century Nosferatu to the modern Edward Cullen.
At the start, the vampire is the other, the animal, the enemy, the one who frightens us with his fangs and his teeth. And then by the end, the vampire is nicer and may even be a part of us that is vampiric and that we bring home onto our own sofa.
Organizers believe the exhibition will point to the vampire's origin, motivations, desires, and dreams from the inside out.
Deep in one of New York's most prestigious cemeteries, the eerie vibrations of a string concerto ricochet off catacomb walls. It almost sounds like a seance, invigorating the spirit of classical music. More in this report.
Deep in the cemetery catacombs, down a long, eerie corridor, the classical concert called The Angel's Share is bringing life to the place that's usually pretty dead. The music was inspired by century-old popular composers Giovanni Battista, Samuel Barber, and Arvo Pärt. The show features abstract, wall-to-wall light projections responding to live music.
And then a twilight procession through the cemetery to the catacombs, and then a moonlit walk back, guided by torches after the show.
A US agency study found a decline in classical attendance with more than 1/3 of the audience aged over 65. But the show's artistic director, Ely Spindle, thinks otherwise.
I don't think that classical music is going to die, no matter what we try to do to it. It's not something that we can kill, even if we tried.
The show, which seats only 50 people, is so popular that tickets typically sell out between 5 to 15 seconds.
Well, we'll be back with more news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Hello, welcome back. Now in business news, Moodys, the credit rating agency, has slashed India's economic growth forecast for the second time in 3 months. Moodys predicted India's GDP to drop in the current fiscal year to 6.2%. In August, the ratings agency lowered India's growth forecast from 6.8%. In a note, Moodys said compared to 2 years ago, the prospects for India sustaining a GDP growth of 8% has significantly diminished. According to the central bank, India's growth fell to 6-year lows to 5% in the April-June quarter. Now in stocks, the markets in Europe are trading mixed ahead of high-powered trade talks between the US and China today. Asian bourses closed mildly higher on reports that the US could announce concessions for telecoms giant Huawei. The CAC 40 index in Paris is trading nearly 0.5% higher. Frankfurt's DAX index is also fractionally up, but the FTSE 100 in London is flat. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite gained 0.75%. Asia's richest index, the Nikkei 225 in Tokyo, is also up nearly 0.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng retreated from earlier gains on conflicting reports about US-China trade negotiations. International oil prices have rebounded slightly from this week's decline, with Brent futures selling for over $58. Well, it's 26 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.